Hello there everyone, this is Crits back at it. Welcome to another Genshin Impact video, which will be a little bit different this time around. So, the new Bow Thundering Pulse, which is a new 5-star weapon, recently got released in the new weapons banner, and everyone's just more or less agreeing that is the new best-in-slot weapon for Tartaglia, and of course also the best-in-slot weapon for the new 5-star character Yoimiya. So, as expected, it does insane normal attack damage, as well as decent charge attack damage in comparison to at least the Rust, which is also a very popular choice for Childe. And that's pretty much just as expected, right? That's what it's supposed to do. That is what it's made for. It boosts normal attack damage, so no big surprises there. However, there is one aspect about the Thundering Pulse that I feel like not a lot of people are currently talking about, and that is its insane burst damage potential. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Before we get started, I do not recommend pulling for this weapon on the current weapon banner, because there is a high risk you are going to lose a lot of Primo Gems or Fates on stuff that you might not want or like and get nothing in return. Only pull for it if you're absolutely certain that it's worth the risk to you and if you absolutely want the Thundering Pulse, even at the high risk of pulling maybe 1 or even 2 Skyward Blades, which is simply a weapon that not a lot of characters can use to its fullest potential. So far, when it came to burst damage builds, especially for Childe, the Stringless Bow, which is a 4-star bow that specializes in powering up elemental skill and elemental burst damage, was considered to be the very best when it came to dealing high damage numbers on critical hits in one-shot combos such as Childe along with Bennett, Sucrose and Mona, which is a very popular burst damage build. And again, that should be of little surprise to anyone really, because again, that's what it's made for. It is made for dealing huge damage numbers with elemental bursts. However, while playing around a little bit with the new Thundering Pulse weapon, I came across something that actually surprised me and that I think more people should know about, because as it turns out, the Stringless actually isn't the most powerful burst damage weapon for Childe anymore. So I actually got extremely lucky and managed to pull the Thundering Pulse off the current weapon banner, and one question that came to mind when testing it was, well, how will it compare to the best of the best in burst damage weapons, which was, of course, until now, the Stringless. I tested this under the exact same conditions for both weapons, which means both worked with the exact same artifacts of a 2-piece Heart of Depth, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige set, both worked with the exact same team comms that were equipped in the exact same way, and of course in both cases all weapons and talents were at the exact same levels. And what I had lying around was an Refinement 4 Stringless, which I could only compare to an Refinement 1 Thundering Pulse, of course. And as it turns out, Thundering Pulse at Refinement 1 actually outscales a Refinement 4 Stringless on vaporized burst damage. That is something I totally did not expect. Now, what didn't surprise me too much was the Thundering Pulse actually doing more burst damage on non-vaporized bursts, just because of its higher base attack, attack percent scaling in the passive, as well as insanely high crit damage value. So, under the same circumstances with same artifact sets, it was no big surprise to me that it would at least match the Stringless even at R4 in that regard. But my guess was that the Stringless's main strength in this case would be its 165 Elemental Mastery substat at level 9, which boosts vaporized damage by 29.4%. And that's quite a lot. So, going into this, I was expecting Stringless to still be in around the same area as the Thundering Pulse. And actually, testing it with only vaporizing in a team with Bennett, Barbara and Childe, where my Childe just had 0 elemental mastery because of the substats of his artifacts, the Stringless actually managed to out-damage the Thundering Pulse by quite a lot. The Thundering Pulse still managed to score around a respectable 186,000 damage with that 0 elemental mastery, which still isn't too bad. But the Stringless landed at around 199,000 damage, or even 200,000 damage if rounded up, with its 165 Elemental Mastery substat. So the difference there was about 7.3%. It's not that big, but it's still significant in my opinion. And I would have thought that this difference would not really decrease too much in other scenarios. Turns out I was terribly wrong. As soon as Elemental Mastery on Childe gets involved into this equation, the Thundering Pulse absolutely crushes Stringless's damage output on burst damage. And that is what really surprised me. So in a full burst team with Sucrose, Bennett, Mona and Tartaglia, the Thundering Pulse managed to score a 424,000 damage, whereas the Stringless landed only around 389,000 damage. Where there was this time a difference between 316 Elemental Mastery that got transferred onto my Tartaglia, boosting Vaporized damage by about 51%, and 481 Elemental Mastery with the Stringless, boosting Vaporized damage by about 71%. So Thundering Pulse in this scenario actually comes out on top, and the difference is not even close. This results in a 9% difference. And now of course you would think R5 for Stringless is much easier to get than any refinements on Thundering Pulse at all, especially once the current weapon banner has ended. And that is true. Refinement 5 for Stringless does actually give another 6% burst damage bonus, adding up to a total of 48% burst damage bonus compared to my current 42% burst damage bonus. However, it is pretty easy to calculate what my Stringless comp would have done in damage if it were Refinement 5, and it still doesn't even come close. For this, I got help from a moderator named Mango from the official Genshin Impact Tavern server, so huge shout out to them for explaining to me how this damage calculation process works and also giving me tips on how to do it, so I could multiply my damage by 1.026 and get a total result of about 399,000 damage, which my Stringless comp would have done if my Stringless were actually at Refinement 5. So if I were to ever get a Refinement 5 for my Stringless, the difference gets smaller and it gets cut to about 6.3% a difference, but it still can't compare to the sheer crackling power level of the Thundering Pulse. So with that info on the table, it's pretty safe to say in my opinion that Refinement 1 Thundering Pulse will still outdamage the Stringless even at Refinement 5. And again, for normal burst damage, I would have kind of understood this because of the insanely high crit damage and base attack, as well as attack percent substat that the Thundering Pulse provides. But this is vaporized damage, where the Stringless's Elemental Mastery substat should be a huge advantage. And you might be asking now, why is this so surprising to you? We are comparing a 5-star weapon to a 4-star weapon here. What's the big deal with this? Well, in November last year, there was actually a damage comparison put out by Tenha, where he compared a Refinement 5 Skyward Harp versus a Refinement 5 Stringless in burst damage. And in his video with a burst comp of Sucrose, Bandit and Childe, he actually shows that even counting in the passive physical damage that Skyward Harp provides, the total damage output of the Skyward Harp in this burst comp is around 113,000 damage, whereas the Stringless puts out 117,000 damage. That would mean the difference is somewhat negligible, as it would be only around 3.5% in total damage, which isn't a lot. However, what he noticed in hindsight was that with the Stringless he actually used a ranged burst, which is significantly weaker than Childe's melee burst. And he later on corrected the damage that the Stringless would have done in the comments to around 143,000 damage if he had used his melee ult, which brings up the total difference in damage, even counting in the physical passive damage from Skyward Harp, to around 26.5%. And that is a lot. And what that means is a Refinement 5 Skyward Harp, his former best in slot weapon, only manages to put out about the same burst damage in melee stance as a Refinement 5 Stringless in ranged stance. In melee stance, the Skyward Harp gets completely outclassed by Stringless, which is why it was rightfully considered to be the king of burst damage comps for Childe. Keep in mind, this is just the best test I could find. I can't test it myself since I do not own a Skyward Harp as of yet. The Hydro set also wasn't available back then, but I don't think that would affect the relation between the two weapons at all. If you've tested it and have gotten somewhat different results, be sure to let me know your own results in the comments below. But now, knowing that a Refinement 5 Skyward Harp can't come close to a Refinement 5 Stringless in raw burst damage, the Thundering Pulse, on the contrary, manages to outdamage a Refinement 4 and probably also a Refinement 5 Stringless at only Refinement 1. Also, do note how only half of its passive is actually beneficial to the burst, whereas the Skyward Harp actually does at least provide some extra physical damage. Being R1 for the Thundering Pulse means that it's still lacking a whopping 20% of extra attack buff that it would have at Refinement 5. And that of course would take its burst damage to even higher levels. So as for my conclusion out of all of this in my opinion just manifests Thundering Pulse as Childe's current new best in slot weapon Now, of course, its main drawback is that it's significantly harder to build decent crit rate with the Thundering Pulse than if you were to build your Childe with the Skyward Harp, which also provides 22% crit rate. And it has been brought to my attention by a YouTube comment that calculating the average damage between crits and non-crits between the Skyward Harp and the Thundering Pulse might in the long run result in about the same damage level. However, what is true from now on, in my opinion, is that this is the new best in slop weapon for Childe's burst comms. So if you're trying to deal huge numbers to single targets for damage showcases or just for the good feeling of it, then Thundering Pulse is from now on the new king of one-shot builds. This of course also can be a huge advantage in Abyss chambers where you want to burst down enemies' health right at the start of your rotation. In these cases, crit rate also doesn't matter too much, since you are going to probably restart the chamber over and over anyway until a critical hit gets scored. The Thundering Pulse not only puts out somewhat higher numbers and normal attack damage than the Skyward Harp, but also has a significant higher burst damage potential than even a stringless at higher refinements when vaporized. This was just a big surprise to me that I wanted to get out there and maybe see a little bit more of a discussion around this. Of course, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think I'm overreacting to this? Do I think I overrate this? Is it actually not that beneficial in your opinion for most cases to have this insanely high damage ceiling? Let's have a discussion in the comments. Please stay friendly to each other. And with that, I'm out. I'll be back soon enough.